right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Suited and Booted. Today we are joined by a very special guest, Mr. Ian Greener. Ian, how are you, mate?
Great to be here. Thanks for the invite.
Beautiful. Now, for those who don't know you, can you give a little bit of a rundown of what you've done in the game and what you are currently doing?
How far do you want us to go?
It's a long CV, this.
Long CV.
Yeah, well, Ian, just for the record, so I spoke to Jerome beforehand and I said, this is probably going to be a two-part podcast, what you're doing now and also what you did at the start of, during our period of growing up and all that stuff. And obviously your juniors, how you got into football, but mainly that period where, you got developing young kids in Australia, I think is really important.
I'll go back to... And I guess we all started just loving the game when we were young, just running around, kicking the ball. That's what I wanted to do. I grew up in a place just outside of Newcastle in the northeast of England, a place called Chesley Street. Actually, I grew up with Brian Robson. We both went to the same village, so to speak. Brian went to one school, Guy went to the other, but we always met up after school and just played football in the streets. Age of 11, Newcastle took us on as a schoolboy at that age, trained at Newcastle once a week on a Thursday night, which was great. You always think you're going to be a superstar at the age of 11, 12. They only had us for one season. Then you play local football, you play for your school, for your district. Then age of 14, I was picked up by Chelsea and Crystal Palace, and they wanted us to go to their clubs each holiday time. So I used to go down to London as a 14-year-old. It was great. Went to London, had a week for Chelsea, week for Crystal Palace. Chelsea came back at 15, wanted us to sign as an apprentice. And my mum and dad said no. And in hindsight, it was probably the best decision. At the time, I probably wasn't the best of friends with my mum and dad because they said, no, he's going to stay at school, do his O-levels, and then look at football. Chelsea said they would come back. Chelsea didn't come back, but then Middlesbrough came along, and local club, only 30 miles away from Chesley Street. So I signed for Middlesbrough in 72 as an apprentice. The manager then was a guy called Stan Anderson, who played for England. Great guy. But within about 2 or 3 months of me signing at Middlesbrough, Stan got the sack. A gentleman called Harold Shepherdson took over as assistant manager. And then in that summer, Jack Charlton came along. Jack took his first coaching job. He just finished playing at Leeds, a real legend of the game. And Jack came to Middlesbrough as the first coach and had huge success, absolutely huge success. So Jack then signed me as a full professional. I had a couple of years there and just wonderful times. But again, when you think that you are going to be a superstar at 14, 15, and then by the time you get to 19, you probably realise you're not as good as you thought you were. So Middlesbrough and I parted. They gave us a free transfer. I went to Nottingham Forest, and Cloughie had just taken over at Forest. And I went there for a month, and after about a week, something had just gone from the game. I just lost the love of the game.
How old were you at this point, sorry?
I was 19.
Losing love at 19?
Well, when I said I felt that I wasn't that good.
Okay.
And I wanted to still stay in football.
Yeah.
So I came back to home, went to see my old coach at Middlesbrough, a guy called George Wardle, and he was a fantastic mentor. And I sat down with George and said, look, what should I do? What sort of advice would you give? And George then said, well, look, play for as long as you can. But he said, why not look down the road of coaching, PE teaching, whatever. So what happened then was I signed at Scarborough as a semi-pro.
In Scarborough here?
No, Scarborough in the UK.
In the UK, right.
In the UK. They played in the Northern Premier League.
Oh, okay.
And signed for Scarborough at the age of 19 and went to university at Durham to qualify as a physical education teacher. I did a Bachelor of Education degree, played semi-pro, which was great. And then during that time, Middlesbrough actually came out here on tour in 77, I think it was, 1977. And Jack Charlton was good enough to put my name to a couple of clubs. Heidelberg got in touch with us at that time. Sunshine George Cross got in touch with us at that time. But again, I needed to finish my degree course. So I played semi-pro for Scarborough, played for Durham City, which was closer to the university. And in 79, came out to Australia. So that's when my Australian career started. And I was only going to come, to be truthful, I'd signed for Ringwood City, just around the corner there for 6 months, but I'd signed for a club in America, in Louisiana. And I was going to play there for 6 months. And then I'd kind of signed a bit of an agreement with a club back in the UK to go back in 12 months' time. So I was only going to come here for 6 months, but fell in love with the place and just stayed. And I was playing for Ringwood City. I started to do some coaching in the juniors, but back in England, I'd done my prelim badge in 1977. So I started coaching, nearly 50 odd years ago. So I took my prelim in 77, did my full badge in 78, came out here in 79, had 3 years at Ringwood, fantastic club, loved the people. It was great, but I guess I could see that probably coaching wasn't as good as we should have been. So I got into player coaching. Ringwood City wanted us to take on their job, but I didn't particularly want to do that, so I went to Springvale City. My first coaching job was Springvale City player coach in 1981.
Wow.
And from 81 to 85, I took Springvale from the second division of the Metro. We got into what's now the NPL, but we got into the Premier League for the first time ever, which was great.
Can I just ask, at that sort of in the 80s, how was the football here in the lower divisions compared to England? Was it maybe was it underrated?
It was very competitive.
It was competitive?
Very good, and there was some really good players.
Yep.
A lot of players came out, when I came out here in 79, there was probably, the club brought out about 6 players at the time.
Oh, wow.
Because there wasn't the restrictions there is now with regards to players. So the year that I came here, there was 6 of us came out. There was only 2 of us stayed, myself and a guy called Bobby Malt. But then the following year, people like David Brooks came out here. But in that first year, there was about 5 or 6 came out.
And what about the opportunity to make a living, like financially, in the lower divisions, top division here in comparison to the lower divisions and that kind of stuff?
The money at Ringwood City wasn't, you couldn't live on it. The whole point was that Ringwood City had offered us a teaching job, and that was part of the deal to actually come out here.
Yeah.
But when I got here, there was no teaching job, and they just wanted us to come and play.
But that old chestnut.
The tricks are still the same now.
Yes.
That story about 1,000 times.
Absolutely. So, and the funny thing was, after I'd been here about a month, I got a phone call from back home that the old school that I'd gone to, the old grammar school, the PE teacher had had a heart attack, and I'd registered with the education department before I'd left the UK, and they rang and said that there was a job at the old school if you wanted to come back. So for about 2 days and 2 nights, I thought it would be great to go back and teach at your old school, the old grammar school. And for about 2 days, 2 nights, I thought, shall I go, shall I not? And then I thought, no, I'm here. I'm going to stay for at least the 6 months and then go to America. But there was a lot of good players around, a lot of good players playing in the local leagues and the lower leagues. And it was a very competitive competition.
When did you know, I guess, that you wanted to be like an elite coach, or when did you feel that you could be an elite coach?
As I said, I started coaching the Ringwood Juniors. I was playing at Ringwood, but I was also putting my views in with regards to the coaching. When the owner said to take over as a player coach, I didn't particularly want to stay at Ringwood because I felt that the player coach at Ringwood would have been dictated to by the owner, and he would have said what had to be done. Right. I needed to go somewhere to, I guess, prove myself. And Springvale City were very good to offer us a deal. The only thing at that time was that Ringwood City didn't want to release us from a playing point of view. They only wanted to release us to go and coach. So they put a stupid fee, and we're talking about 1981. The owner put a fee of $10,000 on my head.
What's that the equivalent today?
Oh, it was just
Like 100?
crazy. But to be fair, Springvale City went as far and they negotiated, and it was 4,500. And in those days, for that standard, was ridiculous. But Springvale City paid 4,500. So we went from second division of the Metropolitan League, got into the State League for the first time, or the top league, Premier League, which was fantastic. But as all coaches find out, within 6 months of getting into the State League, I got the sack. Right. So you're never going to be a real coach till you've been sacked, and I got sacked pretty early in my career. So that was good. I started to look around and looked at some other clubs, but I decided to step away from the game. But I was also working in leisure centres. So when there was a teaching job that wasn't here, I looked around at what else was possible, and I found these things called leisure centres. Now, we didn't have them back in England at that time, but there was leisure centres here everywhere. And when I looked around, there was people running leisure centres who weren't qualified, had no idea about fitness, knew nothing about health and whatever. So I kind of figured, well, that's what I want to go and do. So I kind of went in, started working in a gym, and then got offered the manager's job at the gym, and it just worked from there. And then it just kept getting bigger and bigger. I took over as a manager. There was a big centre in Wantirna called the King Club on Mountain Highway, and that was a fantastic facility owned by a group of Americans. So I took over that and trying to balance working full time as the manager of the leisure centre, football wise. So I started just playing local football, and then started looking at, can I get more involved in coaching? And Tim White was the state director of coaching at the time, and Tim was very keen to get more coaches involved with junior kids and get involved with state teams. And Tim was asking us year in, year out, do you want to get involved? No, Tim, I'm still keen on coaching senior football. So I went as player coach at Nunawading. I started coaching as well at Waverley City and just doing local stuff. But Tim every year would ring up and say, "Do you want to do the state under 13s, 14s, 15s?" No, Tim, I'm quite.
Why were you so against doing juniors at that point in your life?
At that time, I still had the urge, I guess, to coach at the highest level. And then through playing football, I played at Ringwood City. Ernie Merrick played at Dufton. Ernie was a defender. I was a striker. We used to play games. He kicked the hell out of me. I tried to score goals against him. So we developed a bit of a relationship there. Ernie then got the job at Sunshine George Cross in the old National Soccer League. And he rang us up and said, do you want to come as an assistant at Sunshine George Cross? So in '89, I went along there, and we had two and a half years at Sunshine George Cross. And that was great because it was a senior National League team, but both of our focus was really to develop young players and get into the National League and get into the national teams. So I guess that's when I really started to think about development rather than just winning. And Tim then rang one year, and I said, yeah, okay, as well as doing what I was doing with Ernie, I'll take on the under-13 state job. And I just loved it. It was fantastic.
What year was that when you first did it?
My first state team was 1991.
Wow, that's incredible. Because if you think about it, when you were involved and when I was around 12, 13, what's that?
05 to 06?
2005, 2006, around that. And you were still involved at that time.
Yes, so that was my first state team. And the first state goalkeeper I picked was a guy called Peter Zoyce, who's still heavily involved. Now, Peter played for Richmond East, who were the bottom team in the league, who conceded about 90 goals. And my first state team, people question us, why have I picked the goalkeeper from the worst the worst team in the league?
Gets the most shots against him.
Peter was having a great experience because he was letting in goals, but he was making so many saves because the team he played with were pretty poor. So he was making 20, 30 saves a game.
Yeah.
So Peter was my first state goalkeeper.
For those that don't know Peter Zoyce had a pretty solid career, but he's been an A-League goalkeeping coach
Great career.
for the last 15 years at various clubs. So
Yeah, no, he's done really well.
And could you run us through maybe the journey of the state teams and then how that sort of led to, I guess, what ended up being VIS? And for those that don't know, I mean, there's probably some people that don't know what VIS was. Maybe you can even explain that.
Yeah,
how
well,
that came
that's
about.
a link again with Ernie.
Yeah.
Ernie and I worked with Sunshine George Cross from 89 to 91. A little bit of a story between was I was working with Ernie 4 nights a week, traveling from Wantirna to Sunshine, doing the state teams, doing the under-13 state team as well. But then I also set up a business with a guy called George Best, who was out here on business with Man United.
The George Best.
So George...
Yeah, not just some random guy from Wantirna named George Best.
The way he said it, I was thinking it's another George Best.
Yeah, I just have to clarify, right?
Well, to me, George was the greatest footballer that this world has seen. He was my hero. And to actually come across him, a mate of mine who I signed a guy at Springvale City called Billy Millen. Now, Billy played for Northern Ireland a few times, and Billy played in the same team as George Best. And the story was that George had come out here to do a advertising campaign for a company that Billy Millen was working with. And Billy, even though I'd left Springvale at the time, but I'd kept in touch with Billy, Billy then got in touch and said, I'm bringing out George Best, or at least the company's bringing out George Best. I've got to find somewhere for George to stay. And Billy knew that I worked at the King Club that also has a 55-bedroomed motel.
Right.
So I got George to stay at the King Club while he was doing his advertising. And we're sitting in the bar one night, and can I say George was only drinking soft drinks. He was
he sober at this point?
He was fantastic. And we got on talking, and George said he'd be really keen to come back and do some coaching. So I kind of said to him, well, if you feel like doing that, I'll sort something out, and it went from there. So getting back to the story, Sunshine George Cross, the state under-13 team, and organising a tour with George Best. And it was brilliant. And again, we worked with young kids. We set up coaching camps. That was in 1990. The next year, George rang and said he'd like to come back. I said, fantastic. And he said, just casually again, he said, what if I bring Dennis Law with us as well? And that's another legend.
It's a statue of him outside Old Trafford.
So the year that we brought out Dennis, so there was George Best, Dennis Law, and just by chance, Bobby Charlton was passing through Melbourne to his way to Singapore for his soccer school. So for 2 nights in Melbourne in 1991, in February of 1991, for 2 nights, we had Law, Best, and Charlton for a speaking engagement and coaching. It was unbelievable.
Can you just explain, like, obviously I know who I am, but before my time, for our younger listeners, those 3, especially I would say Best, just how good they were and what were they so good at? Or if you could liken them to a current player.
It's Mbappe, Vinny, and Neymar.
Well, yeah, exactly.
All rolled into one.
For Manchester United.
Pele, who was regarded as I think the greatest athlete of the 20th century, Pele said that George Best was the best player he ever played against. Dennis Law was an actually legend who's unfortunately just passed away. Dennis was the only Scotsman who won the Ballon d'Or. But Best, Law, and Charlton were what they called the Holy Trinity. They were just legends of the game, and to have them in Melbourne, not only to do a speaking engagement, but for kids to be coached by them, it was fantastic. So my involvement with kids stretched over lots of opportunities, but certainly working now with Ernie and working with the young players, trying to get them into the National League and then the national teams. When Ernie and I left Sunshine in 1991, at that time, the Victorian Soccer Federation applied to have a program with the Victorian Institute of Sport. Now, again, to go back with a little bit of history, 1976, the Olympics, Australia at Montreal failed to win a gold medal in 1976.
In anything?
They didn't win one gold medal in 1976 in any. So the government decided we need to do something about that. And over the next year and a half, they developed the concept of the Australian Institute of Sport in Canberra, which came online, I think, in 1979, 1980, of which soccer was one of the initial programs. Over the next decade, each of the states then wanted to produce their own individual Institute of Sport, which was then going to be a feeder into the national program in Canberra. So over the 10-year period, South Australia, Queensland, New South Wales, Victoria all created their own Institute of Sport. Soccer tried to get into the Victorian Institute of Sport in 1989. It got knocked back. It got knocked back again in 1990. And I happened to see an advert in 1991 after we finished at Sunshine George Cross that they were advertising for coaches. We then met, Gurney and I then met with Tim White, who was the State Director of Coaching of Victoria, and we assisted putting together a presentation that then they put into the Australian Institute of Sport. And in 1992, Victorian Institute of Sport was offered a football place. So Gurney and I were the first coaches who set up the Victorian Institute of Sport football program.
So you were there from day one?
1992, yeah.
I didn't even know that.
What work does that even
Didn't know that.
take to set up the whole, like, where do you even start?
Well, it started by Gurney and I then, we took a week in Canberra and we shadowed Ronnie Smith, because Ronnie Smith was one of the greatest coaches. He was in charge of the Australian Institute of Sport football program when our golden generation went through. That got us to the Germany World Cup in 1996. Sorry, in 2006. Yeah. So we shadowed Ronnie for about a week, and the intake that they had that year was Mark Viduka, Josip Skoko, quite a few other Victorian lads, but we just spent a whole week with Ronnie. Ronnie was brilliant. He outlined what they'd been doing at the Institute of Sport. And prior to that, the first program in Canberra was set up by Jimmy Shoulder, who I'm still in touch with now. Jimmy's back in England, but Jimmy was the initial coach of the Australian Institute of Sport. Ronnie Smith was his second in command, and then Ronnie took over after Jimmy had left. So we set up the Victorian Institute of Sport in 1992, and it was all set up to identify young players, and it was only boys at that time, identify boys who we felt had the potential to be selected for the under-17 Joeys. So the program kicked off in 1992, and I did a report about 4 years ago on the history of the VIS, because it finished, it was funny, Ernie and I were the first coaches. I then left, which I'll tell you about as well, but I then went back to the VIS when Ernie got the job at Melbourne Victory as the head coach. So I started at the VIS, and unfortunately I was the one that left the VIS when it closed. So I was at both ends of the spectrum. But the program, in the time it ran for 18 years. We produced 23 full Socceroos. We produced, I would say, close to 100 players who went on to play for the Joeys, and we produced probably 50 or 60 who went on to play for the under-20s. And the 23 full Socceroos have got, I think, an accumulative caps of something like 330. Wow. So it was a pretty successful program from start to finish.
Yeah, well, from my perspective as a player growing up in those periods, right, and for, again, to tie it back to parents or players that are listening that may not understand how special the VIS and AIS was at that time, you were essentially royalty. If you were in those squads, it was like currently if you combine Victory, City and Western all together, that's where you were. You were royalty. Yeah, that was VIS, yeah.
It was a very successful program. Unfortunately, it came to an end for many, many reasons, but during the period of time, and we never got it right all the time, but we got it right most of the time. It wasn't the perfect program, but it was the program that really worked at the time to not only identify players, but to bring them into a program that had incredible support with the Victorian Institute of Sport. The facilities, the support mechanisms, the access to sports science, the access to... And that's why I think Australia has punched above its weight at all the Olympic Games, because of the unique setup of the Victorian Institute of Sport. Over the years, I've been fortunate to actually meet a lot of top sports people from different sports, but a guy who knew my brother back in England, but I met him out here. He was the captain of the West Indian cricket team, a guy called Jimmy Adams. And every time the West Indians came out here, I used to catch up with Jim, and he's involved in sport in the West Indies. And I took him into the Victorian Institute of Sport. And he's a guy who is one of the great world cricketers. And he could not believe the way the Victorian Institute of Sport worked, where all the sports work together. Whereas his concept was that back in the West Indies, all the sports are fighting against each other. And yet with the Victorian Institute of Sport, the coaches would share information, the sports science people would share information, and we really produced some outstanding sports people, not only in football, but across the board, the rowers, the swimmers, the athletes, the hockey players, the martial arts. It was all because the Institute worked together rather than fighting against each other. And that was a real plus for all the sports and all the coaches.
That's actually a reminder to me, because when I first went into VIS with Ian, it was the first time I'd experienced going into a gym with Olympians or other professional athletes from other sports, and that becoming a normal thing for like the next 4 or 5 years of my life, where you would see rowers like doing bench and all these exercises where I'm like a 14, 15-year-old kid, not even near that weight, but they're working right next to me. And then like there's a gymnast or whatever, or a gold medalist swimmer, like in the same environment as like us 14, 15-year-old boys.
Absolutely. And we used to get some incredible guests. The VIS was initially based in South Melbourne. We finally moved to the Lexus Centre, which was shared by Collingwood. I don't know what it's called now, but it was a fantastic facility. But we get some incredible guests that came in. When the Jamaican track team came, Usain Bolt was in the gym training. So you've got young kids who are trying to be a soccer player lifting weights next to Usain Bolt. It's just like incredible.
It's
wild. And there was one year with the Australian Open, and this was fantastic. I'm trying to think what year. Probably about 2006, 2007. We were training in the gymnasium or the hall, and I used to train a lot with tennis balls, working on development of striking a ball, but using a tennis ball, going back to the old Bradman days when he used to have just one stump and a ball and trying to hit the stump with a ball. We used to use a tennis ball for skills, and we used to play a little bit of five-a-side, and we used to do all kinds of things. And Djokovic, the tennis player, Novak Djokovic, was at the Australian Open, but the tennis players would come over and use our facilities to do recovery. And he came in one day and saw us kicking around tennis balls. Well, can you imagine the squad of boys at that time? We played five-a-side with him. With the tennis balls. And we set up a crash mat, and we were practicing bicycle kicks using tennis balls, with Djokovic showing us what to do.
Do you know the best part about stuff like this is then, as one of those kids, then you go to year 9 and year 10 the next day.
Yeah, that's
at school.
Yeah.
And you're like, you've just rubbed shoulders with
Could you maybe mention some specific players that people wouldn't know
that have come
out of...
Can I just say one thing as well?
Except Jake Bardash.
With respect to all the junior coaches that coach kids in clubs as kids, they definitely play a part in their development. But when you go to the VIS... Ian and when I was there, Mehmet Durakovic, were pretty integral to your growth as a footballer, because you were in training, whether it was gym or on the field. It was like 6 to 7 times a week, back then. It was every day. So there was a massive shift in your game across like a few months, and your development, your kind of stature, your physicality, let alone your skill set and your decision making. So Ian was very paramount. Like I bet you any of 23 of those Socceroos will say how pivotal their time was at VIS was, for example, when you reel off these names.
I've got shirts which I'm very close to. Obviously, shirts signed by players who said some nice things, and it's nice to have those. And it was nice working with players like Simon Closimo, going to play for the
Good player.
Roddy Vargas and his brother Andy Vargas. You had in recent times Jamie McLaren, Bailey Wright, Jimmy Jago, Matthew Spiranovic, Lee Broxham, Jason Kalina. There's been quite a few.
What was it about, just from my experience, because NSWIS, the New South Wales Institute of Sport, was elite. South Australian Institute of Sport, particularly of later periods, are producing high quality talent. The Western Australian Institute always had 2 or 3 players that were going to be Socceroos. Queensland as well were in a similar boat. But what was it about the VIS when I came in, the years before me, it was the best institute in the land. And when I was there and after, and what would dictate me saying that is it would always win the Institute Challenge when you played against these other institutes.
Yep.
What was it about the VIS for you that made it so elite? Because there was a specific time, I was too young to be in the Joeys. There was one Joey squad where it had 9 or 10 VIS players in the team.
Wow,
I think what really worked, Gurney and I ran the VIS from 1992 to 95. Well, let's put it right. He was the head coach. I was the assistant coach. We ran it together from 1992 when it started to 1995. In 1995, there was a vacancy at the Victorian Soccer Federation. The state coach had gone. That was Tim White. There was a vacancy, and they'd applied. There was a guy called Mike Pedgick who played for England, Stoke City left fullback. Mike Pedgick apparently had been offered the job as the state director of coaching here in Victoria. But there was a position for a youth development to run the youth development at the Victorian Soccer Federation. So Gurney and I spoke about, I guess, plans for the future, and the VIS was just about ready to go full-time at that time because Ernie was part-time. I think Ernie was a sales rep for a playground equipment company.
Wow.
And I was working.
He'd be a good salesman, eh?
Very good salesman.
He'd be a good salesman.
Playground equipment, though?
Yeah.
How do you sell that?
He'd just intimidate me into buying.
They don't go as quick on this slide.
He was
so
very
it's safer.
successful. Very successful. And I was running a leisure centre, but we were both part-time at the VIS. But they were going to go full-time, which meant that Ernie had a full-time job in football, and there was a chance of a full-time job at the Victorian Soccer Federation. And we kind of thought that if we changed a few things at the federation, the VIS and the state federation would work together better than some of the other states that within Swiss and South Australia. And knowing the coaches and knowing the conversations that we had, a lot of them had a lot of conflicts with their state federations. But if we could set up a structure here that works so well and works so smoothly, then we thought we'd have more success in recruiting and bringing players through the system.
Sorry, and just to interrupt, the VSF at that time is now what is Football Victoria.
Football Victoria,
correct?
yeah. Victorian
Hold on.
Soccer
So the
Federation.
state team was different to the VIS team, but they
Yes.
would have had the same players.
Well,
Yes.
VIS would
Yeah.
sometimes have combined age groups as well, right?
yeah.
It wasn't just one age group.
But that's where,
Right.
with the other states, there was a lot of conflict.
Yeah.
Because if you had the state institute and you had the state team, which were two separate teams,
Yep.
they would clash because if they were trying to get games sorted out, if they were playing games at different times, the state team would want their players for that game, the institute would want them for that game. The way that we set up was that we set up a program that the state teams and the VIS worked together rather than separately. So we worked together to ensure that there was no conflict between both sides. And the state team that was run by myself, Ernie ran the VIS team, we worked together to ensure that we had the whole community covered.
Yeah, because that would, I mean, it almost. So you were saying that the other states weren't working together,
They worked in conflict.
See,
Which is somewhat
To
what
make
happens
the best
now,
team,
right?
yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
across all the different clubs, state teams,
Fragmentation,
NTC,
Yeah.
all the stuff at the moment.
Yeah.
when I went in, there might have been 2 or 3 players from my age group, but there was about 8 or 9 from the age group above, and then there was about 8 or 9 from the age group above that. So it was like 3 age groups at once.
What was
Tra-
more prestigious to play in? Or was that a stupid question?
I would say.
VIS.
Yeah, VIS was. I don't know if you would know. Surely you would know this, but when Ian if Ian ever came and watched you, which particularly probably most state teams would have experienced. I don't know if you ever went to clubs, but everyone knew who Ian was. Like so,
I used to hide. I used to go to games and hide. People that would have thought,
In a disguise.
I better ring the police because there's a guy here with a coat on,
and
hiding in the bushes looking at kids.
and respectfully speaking, until I met Ian properly and I trained with him for a few months. Up until then, I used to be shit scared of him because it was like it was essentially. It's more so not because of him, because of the position he was in as a player. If you want to be in the VIS, he's the one you had to convince, and if you got in the VIS, you had half a foot if you were one of the better players to get into the AIS. So it was like the pathway.
But if you looked at our program, you looked at the fact that I ran the Victorian Soccer Federation, Football Victoria, but I would then I'd select coaches for the state teams, but they'd be advised the way that the state teams would be run so it could work in with the VIS.
Okay. Yeah.
Whereas if you had New South Wales or South Australia, you would have the under 15, say, the coach from a particular state who would be in conflict with the institute coach because they would work opposite each other. Whereas here, we work together. And what we did was that we had a really close relationship with the VSF and the institute teams.
Does
And
that
we used
mean
to train together, which also helped as well.
I was going to say, were you guys in tandem with the philosophy, how you guys wanted to play? Was it different from the VIS to the VSF at the time?
No, we had a similar style. And then what we then did was we would link all the sports science that the VIS had to offer.
That's smart.
We would then link that to the coaches at the VSF. And so the coaches were brought on the journey as well. So they had access to what the VIS coaches had. And as I said, we would have incredible guests who would come in. So I would get the state coaches to go in with the VIS coaches so they would feel as though they were important, which they were, but that they also had access to the information that the coaches. So it was just a win-win situation.
Was that
And that worked for 10 years.
that cohesion then is probably the reason why Victoria smashed everyone? That's what you were saying.
I actually just remember you're being way too humble about your coaching as well, Ian, I must say, because when I first went into the I just remembered now that when I first went in, you brought me on a training scholarship, and I've explained that I played half season for Altona in their 21s, which obviously at the time the VS were the AIS's reserves in the VPL. But when I first came in, I think it was one of my first training sessions, and this is how detailed, and I assume obviously you're full-time because you're always in the office at the Lexus Centre. There's a couple of things I want to touch on. One, the Lexus Centre, that was used by Collingwood and Melbourne Storm when I was there. So it was back in the early 2000s, that was as state-of-the-art as it could
Wasn't
be.
it the best in the country or something?
It was.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of still is now, right?
Yeah.
But so we went in there. We used to have like full-on video sessions at 14, 15 about like detailed analysis on games. And when I first went in, you can speak to this way better than me, but the VIS did a UK trip and they played all the best academies in the UK and they smashed everyone.
Really?
Absolutely ripped them. Yeah,
What
and
teams?
so I came back and watched this footage before like I'd even kicked the ball, and it's like boys scoring a hat-trick against Newcastle, beating, I don't know what teams you played.
During COVID, a lot of the boys got back in touch and started talking, and we started swapping videos and photographs and whatever. It's still some of the boys who've gone on to play for the Socceroos. Some of them still talk so affectionately, and Mehmet, who was my assistant at the time, Mehmet, one game, he just teed up. It was unbelievable. We landed, we played the Everton Academy team. We didn't get we lost that first game 3-1. We just landed, we played. There was no excuse. They were the better side, by all means. We then went up to Celtic, and we had 5 days at Celtic. Scotty MacDonald was up there at the time. Simon Storey was playing at Partick Thistle, and I got them both to come and talk to the kids. We went to Celtic. We drew with Celtic 1 each, which was a fantastic game. We then played Gretna, who had just got into the Scottish Premier League. We played their team. We drew with them 2 each. Then we came down, and this was the incredible. We played Newcastle on the Sunday. My team, we played Newcastle. We beat them 6-1. A guy called Alex Tabor scored a hat-trick, and Newcastle invited him back.
God.
Oh, yes.
I could talk about Alex Tabor for days.
He was an outstanding player. Unfortunately, he had a lot of injuries, and that probably curtailed his career, but he scored a hat-trick. We absolutely murdered them. That was on the Sunday. We beat them 6-1.
Did he not get a deal out of that?
He went over there, but it didn't quite work.
It's a long story. I could
Okay.
explain for days what Tabor is. Unbelievable.
But that was Newcastle. That was on the Sunday. On the Monday, we then played Middlesbrough. It was bonfire night, 5th of November. Back up. So we played. We had to back up, and Middlesbrough had 6 internationals in their team: Welsh, Scottish, English internationals. Middlesbrough, my old team, we beat them 3-1. That was on the Monday night.
This must have been weird for you to go.
It was
over.
unbelievable. On the Tuesday, we had to get up first thing in the morning. So the boys had just played Sunday. They'd actually driven from Celtic on the Sunday, hopped off the bus onto the ground. We had to get up early, go to Middlesbrough. We beat them on the Monday night. Up early on the Tuesday morning, we had to drive to Blackburn to play a game at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Okay, 2 o'clock in the afternoon, because we had tickets for Liverpool, Besiktas, the Champions League on the Tuesday night.
That's right.
So we had to kick off.
Photos at the
We had to
Champions
kick
League.
off at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Blackburn were the Northwest Academy champions at that time.
Yeah.
And the boys were knackered. The boys were shattered. We had a few injuries. We were getting beat 3-0 at half-time. And this is one of the great stuff. I've got to tell it. We were getting beat 3-0. The Blackburn coaches were being so disrespectful because they thought they were making comments so we could hear, myself and Mehmet. They were saying things, this is a waste of time. There were a bunch of no-hopers. Why we're playing this game, blah, blah, blah. And the third goal, which they scored, never forget, there was a corner. The boy knocked it out to the edge of the box, and one of their lads volleyed it into the... It was one of the most outstanding goals. 3-0. Came into the changing rooms at half-time, 3-0. Boys were knackered. They were feeling sorry for themselves. One of their players had crunched one of our lads. He had to be carried off. We thought he had a broken ankle. We were getting kicked. We were getting battered. And as we're walking off, I said to Mehmet, Mem, I'm going to do something I've never done before. And he looked at us. I said, Mem, just go with us. I said, I'm going to do something after I finish and leave the changing rooms. I said, you need to be positive. I said, but I've got to get it. I've got to get a reaction.
Good cop, bad cop.
I said, I've got to get a reaction here because they are taking the mick out of us. The boys at 3-0. Anyway, I gave them about 2 or 3 minutes to just sit and relax and whatever. And I had to go outside and work myself up because it's not my style. And my style is very much technical, talk things through, blah, blah, blah. So anyway, I came in and I threw a £10 note on the floor of the changing rooms. And the lads are all looking around and looking at each other. And there's a £10 note on the floor. And on the tour, I had a program whereby if the kids turned up late for dinner or lunch or whatever, that they got fined 50p or whatever. If they turned up with the wrong gear, they got fined 50p. If they swore, because I don't like swearing, I don't care. I will not have them swearing or disrespecting referees. If they swore, they had to pay a fine. But the money at the end of the tour went on the last night. We just paid meals and drinks and whatever. So anyway, I threw the £10 note on the floor, and the lads are all looking around, wondering what's happening. And Mem, because I didn't tell Mem, he had no idea what was going to happen. And they're all looking around, and I said, right. I said, I'm now going to get my fucking £10 worth here.
Nice.
I'm going to get my £10 worth. I said, this is an absolute, and the F word was coming out, and I'm shaking. I said, this is an absolute disgrace, and I'm pointing at certain players. You want to be a Socceroo? You're a joke. You're an absolute disgrace. You know, they're kicking those players. One of our players is in the treatment room. I don't know whether he's got a broken ankle. You've let it happen. Not one of you has stuck up for your mate. Not one of you has gone to get a kick in or whatever. You've missed every tackle. You've jumped out with tackles. Okay, maybe it's been too much of a tour. Maybe we've played too many games. Maybe we shouldn't have done this. Maybe we shouldn't have come here today. I said, but we're here today. You're 3-0 down. They're taking the mick out of us. Their coaches are having to go at me and Mem. I said, you've got to make a choice now. And I'm effing and blind, and you as well, you're a waste of time. And you, I've never seen you tackle. And I've never done this before. And I'm shouting and screaming. And I just finished up and saying, you make a choice. You either decide whether this was one game too many, or you go out there second half and you show these people here that you're decent players. And I just said, you can keep that effing £10 or whatever. And I slammed the door and I went out. And I'm shaking I'm shaking in the corridor.
Brilliant acting.
But I'm listening to what Mem's saying.
Mems is like a soccer legend.
Come on, boys, you've upset him. Come on, you've really got to, blah blah blah. But anyway, we went out, and it was one of the. I've got it on video. It was incredible. We were 3-0 down. We came back to 3-1. Came back to 3-2. And in the 92nd minute, we scored the equaliser. We finished 3-3. And now Mem's about ready to go and have a go at the Blackburn coaches because they were really disrespectful. And I just said, no, Mem. I said, leave it to me. And I just walked over, looked the guy straight in his eyes, shook his hand and said, we're not that bad after all, are we? And just walked away. And that's to me, it was just one of those special moments. But it was an incredible experience. And as I said, we then had to then have a quick shower, hop in the bus, go to Liverpool. We watched Liverpool beat Besiktas 8-0 in a Champions League match.
So is this 05, 06?
No, 2007.
2007.
2007.
Yeah.
And we're standing at the Liverpool Stadium. The crowd is singing. It's 8-0. And I remember Mem looked at me and I looked at him. And there was tears in Mem's eyes, and he just said, what a day. And it was just
one of the best stories I've ever heard.
How old were those boys, Ian,
15,
at that time?
16.
Yeah, imagine me first few sessions coming in, just watching that on video. I'm like, holy shit.
And that was one of the
team?
successes of the Institute program, that to get to play for the Joeys, the institutes all did this. So it wasn't just the VIS. The New South Wales, they would do fantastic tours to South America. So what was so special about the Institute program was at 15, the kids would get chance to play at international tournaments. They get chance to travel to international places. So when they then came to the Joeys, they had the experience of travel, playing in foreign countries, and being able to cope with that pressure. Whereas in recent times, with the Institute program not now running, we play lots of games, but we play games in a controlled environment.
Comfortable.
The institutes would take players into environments that were, and we went to in 2009.
Yeah, when I left, I can remember seeing boys' photos.
This was incredible. We
playing against
the Joeys had decided not to go to the Montague tournament, which is in France. And the Montague tournament is one of the great youth tournaments of Europe. And the Joeys had decided that they weren't going to go. So I got a phone call from a mate in Sydney telling me this. And he said, look, I can put in a word to see if the Institute would go instead of the Joeys. So I said, yeah, definitely. Great. So anyway, we managed, even though they initially said no, And I kept on at them and saying, look, it'd be a great experience for the kids. It'd be fantastic. And we finally, we got them to decide that we could go. But they wouldn't give us anything to swap. We weren't going to be an Australian team. They weren't going to give us anything that we had to go as an institute team. But we went to play in the Montague tournament, which was only for international teams.
Yeah.
So we're lined up in the tunnel to play our first match, and the assistant coach at that time was a guy called Harry Bingham. Great guy. He's done a lot for football here, and Harry. So we're standing in the tunnel. The French national anthem is playing. We're standing there. So the boys are all 15, 16-year-olds, 5'6", 5'7", standing in the tunnel next to these giants. It was the French national team, under 16 French national team. Pogba is at the front as captain. They were all 6'3", 6'4". They were machines, absolute machines. They're standing in the tunnel. We had lads 5'6", 5'7", pale, white as what you would.
Lee Broxham.
Can I remember? I remember turning to Harry and saying, "It was a good idea at the time, Harry. But I don't know what's going to happen here, Harry." So, but anyway, we walked out. It was the first game of the tournament, and after 12 minutes, we scored first. We went 1-0 up. We upset them.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, they beat us 6-1. Pogba got a hat-trick. Yeah. Unbelievable. But that was an incredible experience for the kids to play. Yeah. We lost 6-1. We then played Germany, the German national team. We got beat 5-1. Jamie McLaren scored our goal. We got beat 5-1. Then we played Mali, another national team. So the Victorian Institute of Sport drew 2 each with Mali. A national team, we drew 2 each with Mali. Then we had the UAE. We beat them 2-1. We beat a national team, UAE. And yet 6 months later, UAE knocked the Joeys out of qualifying for the World Cup.
Wow.
And yet we beat them 2-1 as an institute team. So we got hammered by the French national team. We got hammered by the German national team. We drew 2 each with Mali, but we beat the UAE. That was, to me, that showed the success of the Institute program. Not just the Victorian Institute, Enswith, Sassy, that they all did these sorts of things, which gave our young kids the experience of playing. And this was one of the great national youth competitions of Europe, and the Joeys had decided not to go.
Can you touch on just your emphasis outside of football, the development on like the person? Because I feel like that was a big part of the program in the VIS, that if you were ever misbehaving, which you were in that age of like adolescence and being cheeky or being rebellious, it got knocked out of you pretty quick in the VIS. And I always felt, especially when I started getting into the A-League, even at the AIS, there was a little bit of this, but the maturity of the people that would come through that would be way more advanced when you'd go back to school or you'd hang around other kids. It was almost like being in that elite environment. You would develop quicker as a person.
The French tournament in 2009, I wanted to play a couple of warm-up games before we faced the French national team. So the last game was against I just said, look, I want to pick an under-19 team to play. So the organisers organised a game. We played a practice match against a local team. We beat them, I think, 5-1. One of the players scored a couple of goals. I sent them home 2 days later. We're here to develop good soccer players. We're here to develop, my role for the last 30-odd years has been to develop quality soccer players, but you're also trying to develop a quality person. And there are standards. And as I said, I will not have kids swearing. I'll not have kids. Another classic was we played a game when I was with the Soccer Federation looking for players for the VIS. We played a game on a Wednesday night. It was in the local competition, and one of the lads was very streetwise, great player. he went on to play we went to go overseas, played at high level. I'm not going to mention names.
Can I just ask, that first player that you sent home, did he go on to have a career?
No.
There you go.
Did you keep him in the program out of curiosity?
He had a problem that I am pleased that I've helped him with.
Okay,
good, nice.
Gotcha.
He had a problem that and I've still got the letter from his mum thanking that somebody had taken time out. Even when he got back here, I spent a few months with him to get him back on track. So, but there was no way that he could stay as we were getting into a major competition. So, but no. So this boy at 14, we're playing a semi-final. It was 2 each. It was going into extra time, and the boy took a dive in the penalty and got a penalty. And he was streetwise, very clever, but at 14, that's not what I'm looking for. I'm looking for players to win the game fairly. But he got up and he had the smirk on his face because he was the penalty taker. So he was going to be the hero of the night, and he was going to get the. So he picked up the ball and he was just about ready to put it on the penalty spot when I substituted him. I brought him off, and he wasn't happy. He wasn't happy because he was going to be the hero, and I made him sit down and watch. And somebody else took the penalty and scored the goal, and we got to the final. And he wasn't very happy. But I'm not going to have people who are not going to do the right things. If you're playing at the professional level and you're getting hundreds of thousands and winning at all costs is what it's about, then maybe my attitude is going to change. I'm a development coach. I'm not a elite winning trophy coach. I'm a development coach. I'm about the outcome. Sorry, I'm about the process. I'm not about the outcome. If you're a full-time Premier League coach, you have to get the outcome. You have to win games. I'm about the process. The process is how can we get players to do the right things leading up to the game. And I think it's important to develop players holistically. It's all about identifying the character, the personality. And as a coach, and I did a coaching session yesterday. I'm doing some work with the Victorian Churches League. And about a month ago, I had 55 coaches. Yesterday, I had 35. And I'm just trying to give them some ideas because their season's starting soon, just to give them some ideas of what they should be doing with their players. And it's all about whether you're working with the elite or whether you're working with junior players. You're trying to develop the person. You're trying to develop the young person to become a better young person. So yes, you're trying to have a good footballer, but you're trying to develop the right person. And I think that's what you were trying to get out, that my style has always been about, again, I'll go back when we played Mali, we were 2-0 down. And again, I did the same thing. I've only done it twice. Once to Mem and once to Harry Bingham. And again, I'm walking off and I just said, I need to get a reaction here. The players are just feeling sorry for themselves. We're just being battered by France and Germany. We're 2-0 down against the national team. We need to do something. So I had to rip into them. But normally, my style is very much talking, explaining, very much from a technical point of view. You don't shout, scream, you don't abuse, but sometimes as a coach, you have to get a reaction. And if you can't get a reaction from a normal point of view, you got to do something that's different. But I think all the players would know that have worked with me, that if they step out of line. When we came back from the European tour of 2007, the players all sat at the back of the plane. I got them all to seat in a certain place. The staff all sat near the front, not in first class, just near the front. I wanted us to be separate. And for the whole of the flight, we hardly saw them, and they hardly saw us, except when we got off in Dubai to change planes. When we got off in Melbourne, we're getting our gears from the lockers and whatever. Oh, no. And this guy came down, had the suit job. He looked a professional businessman. He came into our section and said, who's the coach of these boys? And I went, oh, God. No. I said to Mem, what's happened here, Mem? There's something that's gone wrong. He said, I want to talk to the coach. So, yeah, okay, I'm the coach. And he come round and he said, I just want to say, and I'm thinking, oh, no, what are you going to say? He said, I just want to say, your lads have been absolutely brilliant. He said, they have entertained us. They have been so respectful. And to me, that meant just as much as coming back from Mali or beating the UAE. For somebody to come and say, your players are just really nice people. That, to me, is just as important as going out and winning a championship.
I think, well, if you look at a lot of, there's this whole thing of wonder kids and how certain wonder kids don't make it and whatever. There have been footballers that, when they were younger, were not the standout player. They were not the one doing all the tricks. They were not the one scoring all the goals, but they had the best attitude. And they're the ones that go on to have this incredible career because of the lessons that were taught early on, rather than, I'm better than everyone here, so I'm going to be a bit of a smart ass, and then I crash and burn because I don't have the right attitude. I think you see it all the time. Like I always see people say, he was never that good when he was younger. How did he get to where he was now? I was playing with him at this level. But it's probably because of stuff like that, where they're taught these lessons early on and they're ingrained in them for their whole career then.
One of my roles at the moment, I'm working with Football Coaches Australia, and I'm the chairman of the technical committee. So for the last year and a half, I'm organising coaching workshops online monthly, so coaches can not only be educated, but they can gain CPD points for their re-accreditation, which has really been a flaw here for many years, that coaches don't have a chance to keep their qualifications by actually doing workshops. So for the last year and a half, I've been running monthly workshops. We did one a couple of weeks ago. I was fortunate to be introduced to a guy called Frank O'Brien. Frank his role is he's the academy head of recruitment at Chelsea Football Club in England. He's got a very, very important job, but he works, and he's been at Chelsea for many, many years. And I had a few Zoom calls with him before we set the program so he could do the talk. And he came online a couple of weeks ago. We had 121 coaches from all over Australia, some from Nairobi in Kenya, because I went there last year and did a program. We had coaches from America, but they're mainly from around Australia. 121 coaches. And Frank gave a great presentation, because in our talk, when I was talking about talent identification, I wanted them to talk about talent ID, but not to talk about what people normally talk about: technical, tactical, physical. I wanted them to talk about attitude and character. And he gave a fantastic presentation about what they look for at Chelsea Football Club at the highest level in the Premier League. And one of the slides is a fantastic slide, because he talks about character, and he talks about how do you actually instill character? How do you develop character? So it's nice to know that even right at the pinnacle, we're still talking about you're developing good footballers, but you have to develop good people, and you have to look at the qualities that's going to make them. Now, there are still great players who can be also real so-and-sos, And getting back to George Best. George Best was one of the greatest players, but probably didn't do what you would want normal people to do. Yeah. But George was special. But the normal person, you would want them to develop great skills and great attributes that are going to make them stand out as leaders of the community. And they are role models as well. They are role models for young people.
And football's short-lived as well. It's not just your playing career. You could end up using that in coaching or different positions that you have if you're in, or just being a regular, normal human being that just needs to have a certain set of morals and ethics, and Cobham produces them like no other.
Jerome's a big Chelsea
I'm a massive Chelsea fan, so that's very interesting to me. I would have loved to hear that.
Yeah.
I've got stories of me at Chelsea at 14, just in the shed and around the ground, the old Stamford Bridge ground.
Yeah, I'd love that.
There was 5 of us. One week we were staying at the Montana, which was the hotel that Chelsea had at the time. And this is ridiculous, really. You think back, and it's only now when I'm even thinking about it, they would give us a key to Stamford Bridge. So we could go into Stamford Bridge of a night time, go into the games room and play snooker.
How old were you?
14.
How cool is that?
That's incredible.
That-
If I had the
that's
keys to
how
Stamford Bridge right
trusting
now.
they were. I know.
That's
You taking
what,
free kicks on the
that
ground.
was what
Get him
was
off.
that was what was unique about the institute in my eyes was the development. Like as much as you were training and doing stuff and you're with all the elite players, it was like the development as a person, and also just the certain privileges of like rubbing shoulders with past legends of the game or people in the same environments.
We had a deal with the police association, and there was a program, a leadership program, and we used to have the opportunity. Each sport would be able to nominate a player to actually go and do this 6-week leadership program with the police, and every year they'd also offer it to one of the coaches. And one year I had the chance to be the coach that went along, and so there was about 12 athletes, 12 or 14 athletes. We got 2 soccer players on that one, but there was swimmer, there was a rower, there was an athlete, so there was 12 of us. But it was 6 weeks, and it was on a Monday night, and we were there from about 6 o'clock till 10 o'clock at night. And it was one of the most incredible programs, not only for the coach, but for the young athletes to be part of. And there was one night when they had a presentation by the Special Operations Group, and they came in and they gave us a presentation on what we call leadership. And it was incredible because you talk about, in our sport, if things go wrong, we might concede a goal. If things go wrong, if we don't get the tactics right, we don't get the scenario right, we lose a goal and we lose the game. With the Special Operations Group, if they get it wrong, somebody dies.
Life or death, yeah.
And some of the video footage which they showed us and some of the scenarios was like going into a drug bust where they'd come in a door, but they'd come in sequence where they'd all go in at different angles. Because if they had to fire guns, there's nobody in front of where they have to shoot. And the attention to detail that they explained to us was just, now you take that back into your sport and it's just a powerful message. And again, I keep coming back. The way that the Institute of Sport worked was incredible because the coaches shared information. We'd have like the coach of the Awesome Foursome that won the gold medals at the rowing. Fantastic group of lads, fantastic people. But the coaches would come into the changing rooms and sit and listen to our team talks. I'd then go and listen to what he said to the Awesome Foursome before they went out to row. So we had access to people talking about their own sports, but then we take that back to our sport. And again, with the Institute of Sport, we used to work a lot with some of the footy coaches. And I've worked with Mick Malthouse, Dean Laidley, Bailey from Melbourne, and there was another coach. Footscray coach. And we would spend time, we'd look at their training, they'd look at our training, and then we get a whiteboard and, okay, this is what we do for possession. What do you do? This is what we do for controlling the ball, the defense, zonal play. And we used to share the information. So it was incredible. And
I heard
listening
about
to
that.
Bellamy with the rugby league, how they work on their tackling, where they talk about corralling people into an area, how the basketball people would tell us how they would go about intercepting the passes. We'd then be able to bring that to our sport and then maybe tweak a few things that we do. The power of the Institute of Sport was incredible.
Yeah, someone told me, sorry, Russ, someone told me that Collingwood had brought in some football people to do some tactic work. And I was like, that's actually incredible. Like
The national conference, the coaching conference in Sydney, I think it was in 2009, Alistair Clarkson brought the whole of the Hawthorn coaching team, and they were there for 3 days. The whole of their coaching team came. With North Melbourne, I used to go and watch them train. Then Dean Laidley would come and watch us train at the VIS. and we just work together, and we'd sit in the room for hours and just with a whiteboard talk about how we would zonal mark, how we would man-to-man mark. And football's changed because of soccer tactics.
Yeah,
Oh,
100%.
definitely.
They go back to go forwards.
And it was fantastic.
Yeah.
Yeah, just to round this out, because I do want to speak about what you're currently doing now. I'm just conscious of time. But I do want to ask you, obviously, you're still heavily involved in football in Australia currently. And you were heavily involved when I was growing up and quite integral at that time. A lot has changed since that time, the structures, the infrastructure, the setups. What do you see? What's your assessment of the current setup that we have with the different academies, the NTC, and maybe some things that you could see that could be done better from your perspective?
All right, I'll go back. I parted company with the national body in 2010 because I had a falling out with the... Gus Hiddink did a fantastic job to get us to the World Cup in 2006. The national body at that time decided that Dutch was the way to go. And we brought in a lot of Dutch coaches to work on our systems. I found that difficult to think that we could drop another culture into a country of ours and change the whole culture. I found that very difficult. I tried to work with them, but it got to a point whereby I just felt that we were heading in the wrong direction in 2010. So we parted company. In 2012, I set up a coaches association. The national body, I was in Queensland at the moment because I've been doing some work with West Ham on a national camp, and I was up there doing their camp, and I got a phone call from the national body asking me that I wouldn't set up a coaches association. And I said to them, why? We don't want you to be negative on football. And I said to them, why could I be negative about an organisation I've worked with for 20 years? I said, I'm not going to be negative, but I don't agree with the direction that we're heading in. I'm going to do my own stuff now. I'm going to do what I think is right. So I set up the Coaches Association in 2012 that's now merged into Football Coaches Australia. I felt, and this is personally, and people can take it the way, I felt that our development for about 10 years went backwards because of structures that were put in place. The abolishment of the Institute program, I think, was a backward step, maybe because I was personally involved with it, but I really believe that the Institute program was the best thing for development here. So I think for about 10 years, our development here in Australia was going nowhere and probably going backwards. And I think a generation of young players have missed out on being led in the right direction. But I'm pleased to say in the last couple of years, I think there's a change that's coming that's moving us forward again. And I'm feeling more comfortable, more confident. I'd like to know more about the academy systems, but I think that if it's based on the VIS system and the NSWIS and the South Australian system, I think then that's the way that we need to be going. So, yes, we've had a great system, 2010 to 2020. I think we got lost a little bit, but I think now we're heading in the right direction. And I've been invited to sit on a committee. I'm going with the 4th of April up in Sydney, and I've been invited to sit on with other technical directors around Australia, and I think it's about re-examining pathways for players and pathways for coaches. And I'm appreciative that I've been given an opportunity now to come back into the fold, so to speak. But I was very critical of the changes in 2010 because I just felt that we were heading in the wrong direction.
Do you see the same nature of sharing of information, like you talked about how you were with Ernie Merrick and the rest of them at that time?
I think it's going to be. There are no secrets. There are no secrets in football, and I think the more we can work together, I think the better. I think each of the states, rather than having state v state, and as Jake mentioned, the Institute of Sport Challenges was fantastic because it was state v state. You still have to have that level of competition, but I think also you have to work with each other, not against each other.
There's one main goal at the end of the day, and that's to produce the best players you can for the country.
Absolutely.
So, you can, it's great for the kids to have competitiveness and these little rivalries and stuff when they're younger. But like Ian was saying, there shouldn't be any secrets. It should just be, let's just all work towards the same goal. Yeah, we're going to have our different things that we do within the clubs, within the academies, whatever. But at the end of the day, everyone's working towards the same goal. It's not like Chelsea and Arsenal and, trying to win the league. We're all trying to do the same thing here. So I never understood the whole...
Football is about opinions. Everybody will have an opinion about football. When I run a coaching program, as I did yesterday and a month ago with these coaches, I'll always say, this is fact, because it's backed up by evidence, by analysis, by sports science. This is fact. But sometimes I'll also say, this is an opinion. This is my opinion. Take it if you like it. If you don't, then that's fine. But you've got these two. Sometimes you've got to make a decision and maybe come in the middle somewhere. But there's facts and there's opinions. And certainly facts are backed up with... And sports science has changed the way that we look at football. And Jake mentioned... The VIS was one of the leaders in sports science with football. We did things that other states... We went to an institute challenge, and this is funny. And you look back at it now and you think, did that happen? Yeah, it did. We were the first, and this is through Ernie, because he was really big on sports science. We were the first state that did water recovery. After games, we would get into the water and do water recovery. We were the first state that did it at the Institute Challenge. Other states would look through the windows and look at us wondering what we're doing. 2 days later, they were jumping in the pool, but they hadn't a clue what they were doing. They were just jumping in the pool. But because we were there doing these activities and these sort of routines, which is now standard because that's what... But we would do stuff that nobody else has ever seen, which was incredible.
Hey, were you at Roval?
Yeah.
You are. What years were you at Roval?
2010 to 2023.
Okay. I did work experience under you, and you probably don't remember this. I only did it for 2 weeks. And...
Was it with the drone?
No, it was with this... it was me and Harry Knight from Cedar, and we were doing video and the vest...
GoPro.
The vest,
GPS.
the monitors, the GPS.
Yeah.
And I just want to say thanks for allowing me to do that, because I was doing work experience somewhere else. It was actually at my old primary school, and I hated the guy so much that I was genuinely dreading going into work experience. And one day he lost his mind at me. And I rang my mate Harry and I said, man, I know you're at Roval. You're loving it. Can I force my way in? Can I force my way in to do 2 weeks at Roval, because I love football and you're at a football school, and I don't think I can face up to the guy that I'm doing work experience with. And somehow
So you came in, did you?
I came in and
I'm sorry, I don't.
no, that's completely fine. It was a very short. Very, very short.
He's not sure whether it was you or Stuart that called him Jerem.
I don't know who it was, but it might, look.
But I'm glad that you're not one of the students, because we actually got a drone and we had a couple of students, and this is a great story. Because I wanted to video them, but I wanted to get the video camera up top.
Yeah.
So I got the school to invest in a pretty good, I'm thinking a couple of $100. They got a drone for $2,500 drone. Now, I don't know anything about the technology, so these students came in. I said, look, take it away with you. From Deakin? Yeah.
I was from Cedar.
All right. Well, this was Deakin University. Take it away, work it all out, and then come back and tell us when you're ready. Anyway, the big day came. They got the drone working, so got organised the game. I'd even got a referee to wear the black.
Oh, bloody hell.
2 different teams, different colours. Okay, so we had the game all set up, the referee, these 2 students behind the goal, fiddling with the drone. So I'm saying, guys, tell us when you're ready, and I'll get the referee to kick off the game, because I wanted to see what the footage was like. So there was a bit of a delay, but they finally gave the thumbs up. So I said to the referee, okay, go. So I'm looking at, so the drone starts to go up from behind the goal, okay? And then suddenly it starts going in the opposite direction. It starts leaving the school and
These are not good
starts
pilots.
heading out. And so the game's going on. So I'm
Checking out the neighbourhood.
so I'm quietly walking around to these students who are fiddling like mad with these controls, and I'm walking around trying to keep calm. And I just got to them, and I think my words were something like, "Where the F's that going?"
I can confidently say that was not me.
It does sound like Jerome.
That going is hilarious.
Where's
The
it?
game's on here.
And all I said to them
Stud
was,
Park.
"Go, just go and get it." About 40 minutes later, they turned up. They were dishevelled. The drone's almost in pieces.
Oh my
It
God.
had crashed into somebody's garden or whatever.
$2,000 down the drain.
It's going the
So,
wrong way.
I'm so happy that wasn't me.
It wasn't you.
No, because
Good.
I was
Okay.
on like the not the VHS, the camcorders on the field.
That's all right.
Doing
Yeah,
that.
okay.
But I remember one talk you gave to the kids, and I've brought it up to Rash before. It was about the kids. The other subjects were basically reporting back to you, saying that the kids were misbehaving in class, and I was sat in the corner thinking, okay, this is tense. This is tense in here. Did you deal with that much? Like the kids, like
I used to go and sit in the classroom.
really.
I used to ask the teachers
Yep.
if they started to complain that the 2 or 3 of them were messing around.
Yep.
I'd say, "Can I come and sit in the class?" Don't tell them.
Yep.
And I just sit in the back of the classroom, and that they might have started to mess around, and then one of them would turn around, and
Yeah. Yeah.
we are developing. And I was at school, and I used to mess around, but there are certain standards that they've got to show respect.
Yeah.
So the respect which they show to the teachers, I expect to be the same as what they show to us, to the coaches, and I'd make sure that they would do the same in the classroom. So whatever their intensity was on the ground, it needs to be the same in the classroom.
Yeah.
I know it's difficult because I know kids don't like, and it must be awful challenging for a teacher to try and teach English and maths and physics and geography if the kids don't want to know.
Yeah.
I'm
It's
pretty
a
sure.
challenge.
Did you used to make us a highlights package at the end of the season?
Yeah.
Yeah. Imagine that. A coach would make you a highlights package.
Yeah.
People pay for that
So
these
we would
days.
you would turn
still
up like
got them.
towards it. Yeah. Can you send me mine?
I'll see if I can find it.
Yeah. If it's still around.
Because when the VIS started, we had to bring all the equipment into the VIS. When the VIS closed, I had to take all the equipment out. Now, I took out all the files, I've got fitness testing scores from way
Oh,
back.
wow.
But my dear wife has been telling me to downsize. I've had to get rid of a lot of stuff,
okay,
but
fair
I've still got loads of stuff. I'll look up
Yeah,
and see
please.
what I've got.
I just want to go on record. You were definitely one of the best coaches I ever had, for sure.